So we'd like to welcome Matt Mendez. Thank you for being here with us.
Absolutely.
So Matt's worked on airplanes all of his adult life and is the author of the short story collection Twitching and the YA novel Barely Missing Everything. His stories have appeared in Vizace, The Acentos Review, Border Senses, Pank, The Literary Review, and other places. Barely Missing Everything was named a 2019 Best YA Book by Kirkus, 17 Magazine, NBC Latino, and Texas Monthly. Matt is from El Paso and now lives in Tucson, Arizona. You can visit him at mattmendez.com or follow him on Twitter at mgmendez. Matt, thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
I'm going to stop share so that we can all see Matt more. So the book was wonderful. And I don't know how everybody else feels, but it was just so powerful and important and timely. I'd love to start off talking about the relationship among the boys, but specifically between Juan and JD. There's something very heartening about seeing that kind of closeness in print between boys, this platonic brotherhood. What were some of the things that you were trying to do with their friendship?
So for me, that type of friendship is such a natural and real thing. It's platonic love between, two boys growing up in similar situations. And I find that story and that representation, missing in a lot of our culture. It's normally when you read books or you see TV shows with two young male characters in there, there's this competition between the two. And I think that's, a part of the relationship that Juan and JD have, is there's this competition there. But that's, really small stakes compared to the brotherhood and the love these boys feel for each other. And they're they're not, they're still young boys, so they're afraid of being ridiculed, but they're not like they hide that relationship from anyone or from each other. You can tell that they care about each other and love each other. And this is the friendship I had with a lot of boys growing up. When I was a kid, I have two best friends who are still, one of them passed away, but I have one we're really, really close, and we'll talk to each other. He lives in Alabama now, and after I'm like, hey man, I love you too. And these are just things that I want boys to recognize when they read a book like Barely Missing Everything. They can see themselves in the characters, and they can also see the friendships they have, and to know that those kind of feelings are natural and should be celebrated and are part of who we are and who are the men they're going to end up being.
So you're really honoring that kind of brotherhood that is often really either missing or misrepresented in a lot of texts.
I think so, because I think masculinity can become toxic really quickly. But there's a part of it that's really kind of beautiful and natural that I think develops between, men and young boys, where they depend on each other and they nurture each other in a way that I think only their male companions really understand and know how to do. I think boys can be absolutely damaging to each other and damaging to women as well. But I think there can be a tenderness between them that I think is, for me, I love exploring that. And I think it's important for young boys to read that and to see that represented back to them and know that it's not something weird, and they're able to, love another boy in this way that's, meaningful and impactful on their lives.
Thank you. Yeah, that really came across, even when they fight, right? Like right away, they are just cool with each other and really willing to do anything for each other.
Right. And even in that fight scene, like, you can tell that they're wounding each other and it hurts them more emotionally than they are physically, and that they feel terrible about. the anger and resentment that they've had toward each other that built to that moment. And that moment's like a breaking point. And afterwards, after that's done, they immediately want to nurture each other and help bring themselves back to where they were.
Mhm. So you've got Juan and JD, and they are really highlighted throughout the book. And then you also have Fabi,
Yes.
Juan's mom, who also plays a pretty big role. What might be some of the through lines that you see among those three characters?
Oh, I love all three characters. And first, I gotta always thank my editor for allowing me to have an adult character in a YA book. 'Cause I always find the absence of adult characters or even point of view characters in YA to be, a misrepresentation of what a young person's life is. Because as adults, we're omnipresent in their lives. Either in their lives every single day, but the idea of us is always looming in the background. So to me, I just wanted to explore generations when I was writing Barely Missing Everything. There's Grandpa, there's Fabi, and then there's Juan and JD. And to me, our lives are always so connected. So the decisions my mom made as a young person affect me as a young person growing up. The way she sees the world, the way she's developed, that's the way she's going to raise me. So I wanted to show these intergenerational kind of struggles between parents and adults. And then with Fabi, I was super interested in exploring the relationship between her and her father, Grandpa, because that broken relationship that happened when she was in high school is something that just doesn't get repaired just because you become an adult. And immediately when she moves back into her father's house, she feels like a teenager. He treats her like a teenager, and she, even begins to rebel a little bit like a teenager. And she immediately returns to that role she was in, when she was 16 years old. And to me, I find that to be true. Whenever I go back home, I automatically feel like the middle kid in my mom's family. And she treats me like, not like an adult, but like I'm her son. And that dynamic doesn't change. And then the tensions between your parents, they evolve into, different tensions, but they're not really resolved from your childhood. And I was interested in exploring those tensions.
Can I just jump in? So I think what's so important is, so when kids read books and they need to identify with the characters, and I think they can in this book, and it's a wonderful thing, but as soon as you give them that insight to this flawed adult in this strange relationship, maybe just somewhere subconsciously that will become ingrained in them, and they'll say, maybe they'll just look twice at their parents when maybe they're not perfect, or they see a strange dynamic between a parent and a grandparent and not understand it. So that's what I love, is it gives them some insight to a world they may not get. As much as our parents say to us, well, when I was your age, I went through this and things aren't easy for me. I think kids don't really take that in, but when they're reading it, when they're meeting this other character, they really can. So that's just so powerful, I think. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. I agree. And I also think like adults reading this book, when they see Juan and JD making these, bad decisions, and they make bad decisions in the book, that, they're also identifying with Fabi and her relationship with her father and, the decisions she's making. And they can see that, well, I can see my young kid making these terrible decisions. And then I also know that even as an adult that I also make bad choices. And then, a parent could be more forgiving of their young kid, because being able to see everything from a bird's eye view, watching an adult character make these kind of mistakes that a teenager would make. And it's not that she's immature, it's just that she is in the middle of this, this generational tension.
You're making me think of something I've never realized before, but when I first started teaching and reading all this young adult literature, because it was my job, I realized I actually liked young adult literature often better than adult literature. And I guess I wasn't realizing that maybe it all helped me be a better mom of my kids as they, went through all their stages. So I think maybe more adults should read young adult literature is what I'm thinking.
I agree. I think there's a stigma with YA where they think it's not serious literature. And I absolutely believe I write serious literature, and I write it for a young audience because I want them to have, literature that's for them, that's still of high quality. Right. So I think when adults go and read many YA writers, I know I'm not the only YA writer who thinks this way. I think they're getting quality books that just focuses on this really tender time, and that the audience is for, kids, so they can grow their sophistication and see the world in a complicated way. And I think YA Lit is pretty good. That's probably the best, I think, at tackling complex issues in, subtle and nuanced ways.
Right.
And one of the things that really struck me about these three characters was their often parallel self-narratives, right? You talked about like what we pass down, right? Like those generational narratives of Fabi trying to do the right thing for Juan, right? And then Juan trying to do the right thing for himself. And then JD trying to do the right thing for himself and for Juan. And it's layered.
Right, absolutely. So I think, when we live our lives, we have an effect on the people around us. The decisions we make have ripple effects. And for me, that was a big idea I wanted to explore in the novel, is how the decisions we make impact other people and then impact them for generations. So Grandpa gets drafted into the army and is in the army, and he sees how his college life was taken from him, and that shapes how he raises Fabi and how he treats Juan in the book, where he's harping on, you need to do A, B, and C if you ever want to make it, because I had that opportunity stolen from me. And so he has a really hard line. And when he sees, when Fabi gets pregnant in high school, it's devastating for him, and then he treats her in an awful, terrible way. And that's just, a lot of that's based on his experiences and what he had taken from him. And then Fabi then takes her relationship with her father, and that's part of the reason she doesn't want to tell Juan about his father, because it's this terrible tension that was created way back when she was 16. And then of course that impacts Juan's life, right? Him having this identity crisis where he doesn't know half of who he is, and it's this big mystery, and that propels the story forward.
Right. And Kathy brought up in the chat, the character of Mondo, who is not a father figure, but is a potential father figure. But he also, in some parallels, makes bad choices, has opportunities stolen from him.
Right, absolutely. And for me, Mondo is this character who just desperately wants to be loved. And I think most people who commit acts of violence or who commit crimes, there's a desperation to be loved that's always missing. And for me, that's what Mondo represents. He's this boy who very much wanted to have a girlfriend and to love this girlfriend, but just didn't know how. His father was abusive to him. He never had the tools to know how to love someone. So he just acted the way people in his peer group were acting, and did this robbery, did this terrible crime. And now he, became a man behind bars, which is a stilted way to grow. And he's just this void of love. So when he understands that, Juan may think he's his kid, of course he kind of reaches out, because who wouldn't reach out when, you desperately want to connect with people. Which is what I think all the characters in the story are doing, is they're all trying to connect and find, acceptance and love from people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. What, if any, were some surprises that you discovered as you were writing the book, either about the characters as they developed or about yourself?
What I learned about myself is I have a streak of melancholy in me, because I've gotten a lot of, feedback from the book that it's, a very sad book. And I've never looked at, because a lot of this is, all past experience of myself growing up, and I never looked at them as sad. In early drafts of the book, I thought the book was very funny at times. And to me, that was how I would express it to my friends. I'm like, oh, this is a super hilarious book. And then they're like, no, this is not really funny. This is like, there's a lot of trauma in here. So I didn't realize myself the amount of trauma I had, gone through growing up, which was utterly surprising to me, which, probably seems super obvious to everybody else who's not me. But you know what I mean? I wouldn't have, I think poor people don't know they're poor until they meet people who aren't poor. And then to me, I've been constantly having those realizations as a 40-year-old adult, which is maybe shows how slow I can be.
Well, you also mentioned the idea of trauma, and, perhaps if there's community trauma, then that's just people's lives.
Right. And
right?
that's
And there's no distance at that point.
right. There's certainly no distance to step back and reflect. And I think everybody who's in that neighborhood in central El Paso is kind of having the same existence. They live in the same small houses, the same apartment complexes. They go to the same, kind of school that's falling apart. And within that little ecosystem is where they live their lives. And like you said, it's hard to gain perspective there. So these boys are making the best out of their situation, and they're hanging out with friends, they're trying to impress girls, they're doing the things that every kid on the planet is trying to do. They're just doing it under this system that they don't quite know is there with a thumb on them. Like, to them, it's normal that the cops mess with them all the time. It's just part of everyday life. And for me, that was just part of my existence, as I knew that I was going to catch crap from the police. It would happen all the time. And it was just like, well, just let them take your picture, give them your information, and then keep it moving. And that was like a thing that I didn't realize other people didn't have to deal with until I got older.
Yeah. So really realizing as an adult some of those injustices
Right.
that
And
just seemed like life.
right. It just was part of your everyday existence. And you just, like a river, you hit a rock, you move around it and you keep going. You don't realize that all those things are damming your life up and slowing you down. You just, I'm going to keep it moving and go. Which is, as an adult, I can see those things, blocking a path of something that's trying to move forward. But when you're in it, you just, moving around it and going.
Speaking of trying to move forward and being blocked by numerous obstacles, that ending was a doozy. Is that always the plan?
I've heard that ending's a doozy. It came about in drafts. So in the writing of this, I was having trouble ending the story, ending the novel. And then I told you one of my friends has passed away. He committed suicide in the middle of writing the book. And that his death and going to his house after he died and cleaning up everything and kind of, reflecting on his life, I went back and reread the early drafts, and I realized that I was chickening out at writing the ending that the book needed. So I was trying to find ways to wrap everything up so Juan and JD would be okay. And that my friend dying let me know that, hey, things are not always going to be okay for everybody. And that was really the ending that I kind of knew was going to happen and had to happen. I had just been stopping myself from writing it because I didn't really want that for Juan or JD. And then I was able to have what I think is a nice coda ending for Fabi, where I think, she gets to restart a second adulthood and kind of do, what she wanted to do, what grandpa wanted for her, what he wanted for himself, and that she gets a second chance through this by having this horrible thing happens. It's going to provide her with a small opportunity to do something different.
Maybe reset a cycle.
Right. Exactly. At least, honor her son, honor her dad, honor herself, and, pursue her own life.
Gloria Anzaldúa, who I love, is a Chicana writer, and she said, borders are set up to define the places that are safe and unsafe, to distinguish between us from them. A border is a dividing line, a narrow strip along a steep edge. A borderland is a vague and undetermined place created by the emotional residual of an unnatural boundary. It is in a constant state of transition. The prohibited and forbidden are its inhabitants. You talk about borderlands a little bit in the book, but El Paso itself is a borderland.
Oh, absolutely.
In what ways does the idea of borderland live in your novel?
So to me, that the novel is just pure El Paso and just pure borderlands. And for the people who live there, the line that there is an obstruction, because like the people from Juarez and the people from El Paso, for the most part, is one community, and it's just this artificial thing that's been put up mainly by people who have no idea how this part of the world works. So like people who were pro wall, pro, immigration enforcement. They really want to impact a part of the country where they have zero idea how that country works, how those neighborhoods work, how those people work and think, and what it means to live in the Southwest in general. So I live in Tucson, Arizona, which is, you know, pretty close to the border, and it shares a lot of cultural traits with El Paso, which is you understand that there's going to be first generation immigrants, second generation, third generation, fourth generation, people who have lived in this part of the country for 200 years. My grandpa's from New Mexico, and his family traces back 200 years in this part of the country. So, like Gloria says, it's an artificial space, and to me, those lines were created by people who don't understand this part of the country. So for me, writing about El Paso, I'm writing about it from an inhabitant of the borderlands. So for me, I don't mention the borderlands or use that phrase, you know, really, because nobody there uses it. It's written for people who live there, who will understand and immediately recognize the culture and, you know, taste the flavor of it and know exactly what I'm talking about when they read it, because they've inhabited that world. I wanted to be sure I didn't put signposts for people who are from different parts of the country and be like, oh, okay, let me go ahead and get my grounding. I just want them to jump right in.
You didn't need to translate.
No, exactly. So I'm not writing anything that's meant to be exhibitionist. You know what I mean? I want people to jump in the world, and the parts they don't know, they don't really need to know that to get through the story. They can, you know, empathize with Juan and JD and Fabi. And then the rest of the world that may seem a little bit different, that they'll realize that it's actually not that different, because human relations are going to be essentially the same. And then, you know, the world is the world. People are real easy to jump into sci-fi worlds and fantasy worlds without needing a whole lot of signposts. So that's the way I look at it when I write about El Paso.
Yeah, we don't need an instruction manual.
Right. I'm not going to put a little map in the front of the book. We can pinpoint everything.
You really do create this world that everybody can jump right into, like you say. And as somebody who's a middle-aged white woman who considers herself fairly liberal, you both, in some obvious ways and in some subtle ways, raise some of those kind of social injustice moments, both microaggressions, like the teacher who thinks that the coach who thinks he's really helping out.
Right.
You know, talk to me a little bit about those characters, and
Well,
bring your dog or your, we like dogs and kids. It's all good.
Argue grabber. Again. Sorry about that.
We all understand. Can you talk a little bit about those characters who are not quite the main characters, and some of them are minor and some of them are like in between major and minor, and the role that they play in creating this true account?
Right. So, like, if you're talking about like Mrs. Fales and Coach Paul, to me, hold on a second. Let me just get this done. Girls, what are you doing? Killing me, girls. You're killing me. Why are you moving around? You're killing me. I'm so sorry. There was a dog emergency.
We understand. It's all good.
So for me, with Coach Paul and with Mrs. Fales, those are experiences I had as a young person growing up there, where I had teachers who, you know, came into our neighborhood. They didn't live there. A lot of them weren't from El Paso, and they just had a different experience. And I think they were well-intentioned and wanted us to do well, but they didn't take the time, at least some of the younger teachers, to kind of get familiar with the area they were working in. So there was this big gulf between the kids who were working there or going to school there. Some of the administrators and teachers who were working there, and even the curriculum was just so different. and it didn't speak to the experience that a lot of the students were having. I know I personally felt that as a young kid growing up, which made me a really bad student. So I wanted to kind of show that experience. And these characters, I didn't write them to be like these stereotypically overtly racist characters. I just wanted to show that there's this difference between cultures that's hard to bridge. Like when Juan goes to get his test score, the teacher, is surprised that he passed, and they have this awkward interaction where they almost connect, and then you can just see the difference in that gulf that's between them that they can't quite bridge.
Yeah, these great divides that happen even when people are trying to connect in some ways.
Right. Yeah, they're like, I think the coach is well intentioned. He goes to visit Bobby after Juan dies, and he's trying to do the right thing and trying to be engaged with these young kids' lives, and he just has a hard time doing it. He just can't connect with these kids. He has a political point of view. He he can't help but express it, and he doesn't. For me, he doesn't. I didn't want him to be like a stereotypical character who was just berating these kids, because that's just not true to the experience down there. But he has views that he thinks are right, and he wants to teach these kids the way to be an American and the way to do things. And I'm going to help assimilate, which is a lot of the problems that brown people run into when they're talking to people from I guess white culture. They're like, well, I'm going to help you assimilate. You're like, no, I'm good, man, I'm going to figure this out. So there's a lot of that I wanted to kind of explore with those characters.
Yeah, authenticity was important to you.
Absolutely.
What might be some of the questions that the novel raises that could be intriguing and meaningful for students to grapple with in school or at home?
Like, especially, I think boys will connect with the story of Juan and JD. So to me, I know I didn't come to reading as a young person. It wasn't until I was an adult that I found books that spoke to me and that spoke to my culture and my sensibilities. And I think there's a real dearth of books for young boys. So I would love teachers to put this in the hands of the JDs and Juans in their classrooms and be like, hey, this is something that's going to speak to you because it's true to your experience. You have a coach like this. You have a grandfather like this. There's a lot of boys who don't know their dads who can identify with Juan and the constant searching for who you are and then what it means to grow up and be a man one day, which is a thing that is constantly what young boys are thinking about is, trying to what it means to be an adult male and to be a man. And do I have to be tough? Do I have to show bravado? What exactly does it mean when I'm trying to find myself and I don't have any actual mentors or idols or figures to look at? So I think this will connect with especially young boys at a really personal level. And then I think the way I've written it speaks to their sensibility, the way the boys talk with each other, the kind of crap they give each other. They're always trying to outdo each other with jokes. I think it's an instant connection that they can have with each other, and it'll reveal something to themselves, I think, in the reading of it.
Yeah, we like our organization, we talk a lot about good literature being windows for some people and mirrors for others, and then sliding doorways for all of us. And you're really speaking to this idea of the importance of having the ability to see yourself, having
Right.
that mirror in what you're reading.
Right. And to be able to see, everything in that mirror, flaws and all. I didn't want to write something that was going to be a story where brown kids are, stereotypically good and, the good, humble, migrant farmer, because there's a lot of those tropes that run around, and that's not true to the experience of a lot of people. I wanted to show kids who were, making mistakes, doing dumb crap, drinking 40s and smoking pot and going to these underage parties and then getting themselves in trouble and figuring out how they were going to get out of it, which is true to a lot of young people's experiences. especially when they don't have parents always watching them.
Right. Right, you're really navigating on your own.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a whole lot of that where there's kids in these communities that are, like you said, trying to figure out life on a grand scale by themselves. It's, you know, a lot of the times it doesn't turn out so well.
Yeah, and you know, when students read this, and if they're reading it in a class, then they can navigate those questions together.
Right. Yeah, exactly. They can navigate these questions together. There's teachers there to kind of, you know, poke and prod and find out exactly, you know, what a lot of their students are going through. Because I think this story has a lot of, you know, quiet personal moments that people are going to, especially young readers, are going to attach to.
Mm. You mentioned that you wish that you didn't really get to see yourself in anything that you read in ELA or English class. What might be some things that you wish you learned in ELA or English class that you didn't?
That we were a part of the broader culture. So growing up in the Southwest, you don't see, you know, TV shows about the Southwest. You don't read books centered on the Southwest. So it feels like this part of the country is almost divorced from what is considered an American experience. So it would have been nice to have your existence validated in a way that, you know that where you're growing up is part of the country and is important and is thought about and taken seriously, because that's just not a consideration that was ever made when I was a kid. Whenever they would show images of America, it was never a cactus, it was never the mountains, it was never anything that I recognized as home. So it makes you almost feel like you're not part of the country. And then when they talk about immigration, all they show is, that's when they show you're part of the country and your house, and you see your land and where you've grown up is where you've been raised as a problem that somebody from outside of your neighborhood is trying to solve for you. And you look around and you don't see a problem. People from Juarez are there, immigrants are living in their neighborhoods with you, and you don't see what the problem is. All you see is community.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody else who doesn't live there sees a problem, and it becomes it's confusing when you're young, and then it's enraging when you're my age.
Really having these definitions put upon you.
Right, exactly. Yes, and it comes from way outside of your experience. It's for people who've never been to your part of the country, and you don't quite recognize that when you're young. Maybe the smarter younger kids today do, but to know that your part of the world isn't seen as part of the larger world, it's frustrating.
Yeah, and invalidating in some ways, I would imagine.
Yeah, exactly, because you end up, when you watch TV and you don't, those, there are windows into different worlds like you were talking about, but it's never your world ever reflected back. And then you have to decide, am I going to try to reach for that and then push away everything? That should I be ashamed of all this because it's never represented? And I think a lot of Latinos grow up with shame about where they're from because that's never been validated in a substantial way, or a significant way, I should say.
Yeah. Which is not only a real loss, but I think a real responsibility that we as educators need to own and then work towards fixing.
Right. And I think kids who read these kind of books would be more than receptive to, because I know I would always like watch movies and see stories about, cultures that weren't mine and be really interested in them and want to learn more. And you would identify, because, a well-written story helps you do that no matter what the culture is about. You find yourself in other characters and other situations in other countries and other communities, and you attach to them. So the same is obviously true.
As someone who's a writer, what messages either do you wish or do you hope that ELA teachers and English teachers are sharing with their students about writing?
That it's fun, for one, because I know reading and writing can be taught in this way where joy is removed from it. And I would love joy to be a part of the experience. So not necessarily always critical analysis, but, hey, what did you really love about this? How is it like your life? And kind of, share a love of stories, both, reading them and embodying them, and also, you know, writing and creating your own, which I think is super important, and that it's art. It's not necessarily that's something you can practice and get good at and express yourself. And it's just like music, and it's just like painting, and it's like, you know, making food, that it's something that could, you know, give people lots of joy.
So it's not just about the 5-paragraph essay is what you're saying.
No, exactly. Yes. Yes. It's not something that's just about, you know, your paragraph sandwich.
Yes. You're making sure your body paragraphs are meaty. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Matt, final question before we move to kind of an open Q&A.
Sure.
What are you currently reading?
I'm reading Running by Natalia Silvestre. And she's a fantastic writer. She lives in Texas. And this is her first YA book. So I just barely picked it up. I'm barely going to start, but I'm a big fan of all her adult books. She's wonderful.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up. I'm going to mute myself and open it up to the group who may want to ask some questions.
Absolutely.
I want to start with one on behalf of the students that try to write and they want to write, and there's just a writer's block. And I mean, did you get writer's block? Did you have any fixes for it? Any recommendations for our kids?
So I would say for anybody who wants to write, the first thing you need to do is just read. And then steal everything that writers you like are doing. Steal their style, steal parts of dialogue, especially when you're just starting. It's okay because you don't know what your voice is and you're afraid of your voice. So I think that's where a lot of writer's block comes from, is a fear of exposing your vulnerability on the page, because somebody's going to read it, and it's really vulnerable to have somebody read, you know, your thoughts, what you think, even though you're filtering it through characters. So it's really learning how to deal with that vulnerability. And one way to do that is to read other writers and then try their personas on for a little while, see if it works for you. And then it just gets you in the habit of writing. And, you know, it kind of demystifies the process a little bit, to kind of play and try it, then try different voices and figure your own voice out. Because eventually your own voice always comes out, and who you are and what you think and what your style is always going to shine through, even when you're trying on different personas, which I think every writer does.
Okay, I like it. I'm going to give him that one. Thank you.
You're welcome.
To piggyback on Martha's question, what books or writers did you read to get inspired as a young person?
So I didn't really read a lot as a young person, but as an adult, what got me really into writing was finding, you know, writers like me. So Sandra Cisneros obviously is the big one in my writing kind of formation. When I read The House on Mango Street, it kind of really changed what I thought about, you know, my family, my neighborhood, and how that could be made into this really beautiful art, which is what she's done there. And now I love Luis Alberto Urrea, I love Dagoberto Gil, Manuel Munoz. So just so many writers doing, you know, wonderful work. You know, Natalia, she's so good. And to me, it's just, what's great is, you know, seeing, you know, mirrors in my life reflected back to me. And I think that's a big part of why I love reading. And that's why I wanted to write, because I was like, oh, I can do this. I can make my life into art.
Do you remember what turned you, how you turned the corner? Because you said you weren't a good student and you didn't really read. So was it a book? Was it a teacher? An event? What made you turn that corner?
Well, I had high school teachers who were really influential in my life, but I didn't think I could be a writer. So much like JD in the book, I wanted to be a filmmaker because I knew of, you know, Latino artists who were making movies, whether they were in English or in Spanish. So I could see that that was something that we could do. So I wanted to go to film school. So like JD, I joined the Air Force in an attempt to pay for film school. And then when I started going to school for media arts, I took a screenwriting class to help with writing. And while I was in the screenwriting class, well, let me scratch that. I took a creative writing class to help with screenwriting. And that's when I got introduced to, writing short stories and reading short story writers and novelists. And that's where I found Sandra. I had a teacher who just, who had us read all sorts of really different books. And then I just fell in love with reading, fell in love with writing, and then slowly turned into a short story writer and a novelist. So it was a slow progression, but I ended up not wanting to be a filmmaker and wanting to be a writer, and then pursued that and ended up getting an MFA.
Well, thank God
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
us. I mean, that you did that.
Well, thank you. That was a good choice, I think. It worked out.
Yeah.
What's next, Matt?
So I'm working on, and it's a bit of a secret, but I'm working on a follow-up to the book.
Okay.
So I'm hoping to be done soon within the year, and I can hand that off to my agent, and we'll see what happens.
So are they, when you say it's a follow-up, it's the same characters, it's the story continuing?
Correct. I wouldn't say it's a direct sequel, but it's like a companion book. So
Okay.
minor
Okay.
characters from Barely Missing Everything take a front row and
Okay.
will be your main characters.
And that's so great because we have so many students who, when they fall in love with a book and they say, I want something like that, I want more of those characters, more of that world kind of thing. So I love when authors will choose to do that. I can imagine it can't always be easy. And then again, you never want to have it where it's just your Danielle Steele. All due respect to Danielle Steele, but it's the same book a couple of times over, right? So, but I know that our children, I know that the power that a series or similar books have on kids who are just kind of getting into calling themselves readers,
Right, absolutely. And for me, the characters I try to write something different, and I had to put it down because the characters in these books and Barely Missing Everything, they weren't done with me. They kept popping in the things I was writing, and I decided, all right, I'll stop fighting. I'll stop fighting because I didn't really want to write a sequel or anything. To me, I felt like the story had ended, but every time I would write, these characters would creep their way back into the book, and now they're running wild in a new novel.
I love how you said, not I wasn't done with them, but they're not done with you.
Right.
I love that.
Yeah, they still had more story in them. They're like, no, we're not done. I was like, okay.
Do you think about them? When I finish a book, sometimes I keep thinking about the character, like, what are they doing now? Do you think about your characters even after you finish the book?
I do, especially Fabi, because I live in Tucson where she ends, and I drive by the community college, and part of me, the insane part of me, thinks like, I wonder what she's doing right now in class. I was like, oh, she's not real. She's not real. But to me, they're very real. So like, I think about her and what she's studying, and
I love that. I love the insane part of you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Will you follow up with Danny's story?
So yeah, he'll be the central character.
Okay, because I'm dying to find out about those walls in his room.
Yes, the murals.
Yep.
Well, then I'll mark you down as someone.
Okay.
You can get in line for the book, because that's going to
Good.
be part of it.
Okay. Because he and Eddie were very intriguing characters, were interesting foils
Right.
in different ways to JD and Juan.
And Danny's experience is so different.
Yeah.
So he starts where Juan and JD does, and then moves to this middle class-ish existence. So he has this different set of expectations and this different life that he has to then suddenly learn how to navigate.
Yeah.
That's part of what I'm exploring in the next book.
Yeah, that will be interesting to see, because I think sometimes we pigeonhole. So when we talk about brown kids in El Paso, and we're thinking just central, and we forget that there is some movement to middle class neighborhoods, and the life that the expectations and the problems are dramatically different in a lot of ways.
Oh yes, and there's a diversity of experience within a culture that usually people will want to say, well, they'll read something like Barely Missing Everything, and they'll be like, well, this JD and Juan's experience is universal for every brown kid, and that's not true. It's their experience in that neighborhood, but JD is there as a different experience, and that's an experience I explore in the next book.
Okay. When's that going to be published, Matt?
Oh, I'm getting a decent draft off to my agent, hopefully soon, and then after that we'll find out when I give it to my editor.
Okay.
We'll see when we're ready to put that out. Hopefully soon.
Matt doesn't rush.
No, it took
No,
me
I
10
don't
years
want-
to
no.
write Barely Missing Everything. So I'm halfway there. Should beat it by half.
Something to look forward to.
Yes.
Well, if nobody else has any other questions, I just want to say thank you so much to Matt for being here, for taking the time. I think that the story is an important one on a lot of levels, and I really hope that more teachers find the book, cherish the book, and share it.
Me too. And I hope it has a long shelf life. I think it's something that could really help young kids.
I would agree. Thank you so much for being here, for taking the time away from your family.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you, everybody.
Have
Bye.
a nice night.
Good night.
Good night.